I mean, there's actually quite a bit of news to talk about, which I'd say notably is the Bibas family, and I'm not sure I quite believe what Israel is saying. I'm not sure I do. Hold on. I think the missing body thing is indicative of the kind of mess that Gaza's in, basically, and the fact that there are so many just random bodies lying around Gaza, and that it's littered with mangled human remains, and that many of them have all been buried together, and that perhaps she was sort of mixed with his cat. I mean, it's pretty horrible for the family. But this is the part that I'm not so sure about. So apparently, terrorists murdered Kafir and Ariel Bibas with bare hands, took horrific actions to cover up crimes. I'm not sure I quite believe that. And I don't think it's wrong to say that I don't believe that, to be honest. Because I was thinking about, should I have posted my TikTok, to be honest? Like, should I have posted it? Because it was like, oh, well, you know. And then I just realised Israel's lies are just never ending. And I said this in my TikTok. There's no reason to believe what Israel says, because it just categorically just does not tell the truth. So I think Israel is just doing this to justify the genocide. Now, Israel has lied before. I would say the most notable example is the Al-Ahli Baptist Hospital. The reason I say the Al-Ahli Baptist Hospital is that Israel intentionally spread disinformation. Now, this is by forensic architecture. The thing is forensic architecture basically released a very detailed report. And forensic architecture can't tell you exactly who bombed the Al-Ahli Baptist Hospital. However, what forensic architecture can tell you is that Israeli propagandists, high-level governmental spokesmen, went on television and said things that were objectively false. Now, this is the key one. After the explosion, Lieutenant Colonel Peter Lerner, an Israeli military spokesman, appeared on CNN and the BBC, pointing to a still from an Al Jazeera live stream showing a mid-air explosion. Lerner claimed that this footage captured the misfiring rocket responsible for the blast at Al-Ahli. According to our analysis, the missile is likely an interceptor unrelated to the Al-Ahli blast. The original Al Jazeera footage Lerner referenced captures a bright light in the sky, followed by a mid-air explosion. 8 seconds later, the footage shows the blast at the hospital. In a 3D model of Gaza, we geolocated, stabilised and positioned 2 videos capturing the same mid-air explosion that Lerner claimed was the responsible for the Al-Ahli blast. The first video was filmed on the phone of Al Jazeera journalist in Gaza City, and the second video was filmed by a stationary camera in Tel Aviv. By triangulating the position of the missile at each frame, we determined a full trajectory. I am not going to sit here and pretend that I understand fully what they're talking about. I mean, I have a basic grasp of what they're saying, but this is obviously not my expertise. So they used Blender. We first tracked the motion of the camera, identifying static features in the hospital. These anchor points allow the software to recreate, so this is just explaining how they did it, basically. You can look at all of this, and basically what it keeps on saying. Multiple news outlets cited the Israeli military spokesman Daniel Hagari's claim that it was a Palestinian rocket that struck the Al-Ahli Baptist Hospital, with most of the damage done due to the propellant, not just the warhead. Similar claims were made by Human Rights Watch, The Washington Post, BBC, and AP. Our analysis, however, suggests that all 17 visible rockets in the salvo the Israeli military claimed was responsible had finished burning their fuel mid-flight, meaning that by Hagari's own logic, they could not have caused the damage to Al-Ahli. Further developing the methodology used to analyse the Israeli interceptor, we reconstructed the trajectory of all visible rockets rising from the launch site by cross-referencing a video with Nativ Hazara with another from Tel Aviv frame by frame. According to our findings, all 17 rockets stopped flaring at 1 kilometre altitude, about 4 kilometres west of Al-Ahli, and travelled a comparable distance at a comparable speed. Between 1.8 and 2 kilometres and 5... Again, I don't understand this. We consulted an aerospace expert with a specialism in rockets and missiles who prefers to remain anonymous. They told us that the distance and speed of the rockets while flaring is consistent with an Arash or Grad rocket typically used by Hamas or Palestinian Islamic Jihad. The speed and distance travelled while flaring indicates that the propellant had finished burning in all 17 rockets while they were still mid-flight. Once a rocket's propellant has started burning, it is highly unlikely that it will stop burning with fuel still remaining in its chamber. This is the key point here, guys. Look, Israel does not tell the truth. Daniel Hagari, the guy that they've got on television to go up and say this, has lied before for gain. They do this. They lie and they lie and they lie. They lied about Shireen Abu Akleh. They said that she was killed likely by a Palestinian bullet after IOF investigations, later admitting that it wasn't the truth. And this, I think, is the best example. This was used as a pretext to claim Israel would never, ever, ever attack a Palestinian hospital. And yet, the reality was exactly the opposite. So on this topic of this, so the IDF has come out and said, the IOF actually, no IDF, no thank you. Captors of Bibas children brutally murdered them with their bare hands. Military spokesperson dismisses claims Hamas claims children killed in Israeli airstrike. Says captors mutilated bodies to cover up the crimes and demands return of their mothers. Even on fucking October the 7th, regarded as the second Holocaust, there was no cases of children being murdered by anyone's bare hands. Now this is a comment of someone, and I don't know how this is true, but so this is also what someone was claiming. Apparently, determining the cause of death for a body 14 months after death without preservation is extremely complex and depends on several factors. Environmental conditions, humidity, temperature, exposure to insects and scavengers. Now, this would be a very key point. Tunnels have very high humidity. In fact, there's a really interesting story from Vietnam. In Vietnam, apparently this American soldier got down in the tunnels and he was like sick. He was disgusted by the smell and he was like, oh my god, there's rotting flesh down here. And what he'd actually found was a rice cache that wasn't secured properly, and because there's water, it had rotted the rice and it makes such an awful smell. And so in the Gaza tunnels, you likely have the same problem of a vast amount of moisture, especially in more primitive tunnels. So when you kind of talk about this in the context of identifying a body after that, might be difficult. Nature of the soil. Acidic or alkaline soil can accelerate. Don't know anything about that, about Gaza soil. Fractures, bullet wounds, or visible wounds may still be detected. Without refrigeration, soft tissues will decompose quickly, leaving mainly bones. They weren't refrigerated. If some tissue is still present, toxicological and historical analysis may take several weeks to months. If only bones remain, determining cause of death can be difficult, but fracture or impact analysis may take several weeks to months. If the body is severely decomposed, identifying the cause becomes uncertain and may require reconstruction and DNA testing. So this is what is interesting. Now, someone commented this. It's pretty difficult to work out what would have happened. But who knows? You know, who knows? I will say, who knows? It's just, on balance, I think Israel has a history of lying. And the other thing I think is very important to note is this, which is a recent article by Yuval Abraham. So to go back to this. So I have my problems with plus 972 because plus 972 is subject to the Israeli military censor. Israel has a strict military censor. Like literally, here's the Wikipedia. The Israeli military censor is a unit in the IDF Directorate of Military Intelligence tasked with carrying out all preventative censorship inside the State of Israel regarding the publication of information that might affect the security of Israel. The body is headed by the Israeli chief censor, a military official is appointed to Israel's Ministry of Defense, who bestows upon the chief censor the authority to suppress information he deems compromising being made public in the media. On average, 2,240 press articles in Israel are censored by the Israeli military censor each year, approximately 240 of which in full and around 2,000 partially. So anything that is published by Israel is subject to this military censor. So plus 972 cannot be fully trusted. But if you look at this article, this is just a point that I would like to note. 3 Israeli hostages, Nick Beiser, Ron Sherman and Elia Tornado, were definitively killed by asphyxiation as a result of a November 10th, 2023 bombing that targeted Ahmed Gandour, a Hamas brigade commander in northern Gaza. The army told their families that at the time of the bombing it was unaware that the hostages were being held near Gandour. However, 3 sources with knowledge of the strike, which was led by the Shin Bet, told plus 972 and local call there was ambiguous military intelligence indicating that hostages might be in the vicinity, yet the attack was still authorized. According to 6 sources, this was not an isolated case, but one of dozens of Israeli authorities that likely endangered or killed hostages. They described how the military command green-lighted attacks on the homes of suspected kidnappers and the tunnels from which senior Hamas figures were directing the fighting. While attacks were aborted when there was specific, definitive intelligence indicating the presence of a hostage, the army routinely authorized strikes when the intelligence picture was murky and there was a general likelihood that the hostages were present in the vicinity of a target. Mistakes definitely happened and we bombed hostages, one intelligence source said. So, on balance, right, we have already Israel lied about this, and Israel is willing to, Israel is clearly willing to lie about what happened, and also we have this other key fact of Israel was bombing hostages specifically in November. So one has to say, hang on a second, the Bibas family were killed in November. Hamas offered to give over their families instantaneously when Israel could have ascertained exactly what had happened to them. It could have said, here's what's happened to... Sorry, I'll just keep my camera up here. Israel could have said, yes, we have images, we have 100% verification of what happened to these people. Now, listen, also read this. Militants were not the only ones who died from asphyxia, so this is the same thing. The attack also killed 3 Israeli... It is kind of mad how much this article just fucking repeats itself. The army recovered their bodies and returned them to Israel the following month. Initially, the army told the hostages' families that the 3 men had been murdered by Hamas. Later, however, they said that Sherman Beitzer and Toledano, whose bodies were found intact and bore no gunshot wounds, had died from carbon monoxide poisoning caused by Israeli bombing. There's the key point that I have to make here. Israel has lied about this before. Israel has definitively claimed things that are not true, specifically in relation to the killing of hostages. This combined with this, and I'm not a forensic analyst, so this may not be 100% correct, and I cannot affirm that, but I can say that it doesn't seem like this would be an insane thing to say, or that it wouldn't make absolutely no sense. I feel like when you hear about... I remember a while ago, some guy died near where I lived. Like, no one knows who he was or who he is. He just sort of died in a clearing and was left there for a really long time, and they found him a long time later and they were never able to ascertain who he was. And so I feel like if you combine all of these things, is it 100% likely that this happened? Now, there's also a factor which I've discussed with some people of why would it make sense to kill these people? Why would it make sense to kill them? Hamas isn't stupid. You're right, Hamas isn't stupid, so why would they kill the 3 most important hostages, arguably? The Bibas family. Figures who they could have exploited over and over again for propaganda. If there was any reason to kill them, they would have done it prior to October the 7th. There are videos of them with their captors where their captors are like, oh, we're not going to treat you poorly. And this, by the way, of course, anytime you talk about this, people will be like, oh, you're justifying this, because it's the same with anything about Palestine. You're justifying October the 7th, you're justifying this, you're justifying that. It is not a case of justification. It is explaining and exploring what might have happened. It is giving analysis of, oh, well, this may be what happened to them, and this is why I think Israel is on balance of lying about this. And I think historically Israel shows a consistent pattern of lying in order to gain and to justify ethnic cleansing and murder and such and all of these things. And so I just don't see how this story really adds up. And I think that the detail of that they did it with their bare hands and strangled them is particularly interesting, and I think is indicative of what Israel wants to do with this, basically. I think it is.